Hello everyone, my name is Yun Nam Kung. Today I will be presenting on Alistair Cumming's 2014 article, Assessing Integrated Skills. So this is how I will present the article. First of all, I will talk about the introduction of assessing integrated skills, and then move on to comparing the previous views and current views on assessing integrated skills. Next, I will talk about current research on assessing integrated skills and also the challenges. And lastly, I will wrap up by talking about the future directions. So in real-life academic and workplace contexts, the fundamental purpose of extended writing or speaking is typically to display one's knowledge appropriately with reference to relevant reading or listening source materials. In other words, in academic and workplace situations, we always are expected to write or speak based on some kind of source material instead of just writing or speaking independently. So when I say source materials, this includes for academic settings, course assignments, lectures, required readings, or textbooks. And for workplace settings, it would include relevant policies, communications, data, or authorities. And the abilities to speak or write coherently about relevant ideas, to handle source documents appropriately, and to display knowledge in relevant ways are primary abilities required for successful performance in universities, colleges, high schools, and also workplaces. So Cumming in this chapter is arguing that because in our real life we are expected to kind of incorporate this reading and listening source materials in our extended writing or speaking production, assessment also needs to resemble that and kind of measure students' integrated production skills. So let's move on to the comparison between previous views and current views on assessing integrated skills. So the traditional views on language tests assessed individuals' abilities to speak, listen to, read, or write a language or their knowledge of its grammar or vocabulary. They treated these abilities as objects of measurement rather than addressing them as fundamentally integrated wholes. So these four abilities, grammar, vocabulary, sorry, not four abilities, but abilities of language, of using language were kind of viewed as separate measures instead of an integrated measure. And the traditional view conceived of language ability as a fixed set of traits that people have or have not acquired, irrespective of situational contexts. So you either acquire it or not, according to the traditional view. However, there are some criticisms on the types of tests in conventional tests of L2 academic writing. So the first criticism is that they lack authenticity with respect to the abilities that are really required in academic contexts. And also, these task types in conventional tests have a negative influence on teaching and learning by reducing them to the practice of simple, rhetorically formulaic types of writing in preparation for such tests. So in other words, these task types are not comprehensive or they are not complex enough to cover the range of abilities that speakers really use when they are writing, but rather simplify everything into formulaic types of writing so that teachers and students can just prepare for the test and practice for getting higher scores on the test. So now comes the interactionist view of assessment, which aligns with the current view of assessing integrated skills. So according to the interactionist view of assessment, it emphasizes examinees' abilities to perform specific types of complex tasks, which represent crucial activities, skills, and strategies in a target domain of language use. The interactionist view also puts integrated skills assessment in sync with recent trends in education, work, and multimedia communications to promote multiliteracies rather than conceive of reading, writing, listening, speaking, or visual representation as autonomous skills. So in other words, these skills are not viewed separately, but they're viewed as a whole. And lastly, it takes an orientation toward literate task performance, which realizes constructivist principles of knowledge integration and synthesis. So I want to introduce some examples of integrated production tests that are widely used around the world. So the first one is the IBT TOEFL integrated writing section. So I guess a lot of you are pretty familiar with TOEFL, but the TOEFL has a writing section that has the integrated section and the independent section, but this part only talks about the integrated section. So basically in this part of the test, students need to read a passage about a certain topic that they might really encounter in university lectures. Then they will listen to a part of a lecture on the topic that they just read about. And usually the reading passage and listening passage talk about they have opposing views. For example, if the reading passage says, I agree with A, the lecturer in the listening passage says, I disagree with B, or sorry, A. And then based on this reading text and listening text, students have to compose their own writing by summarizing the points made in the passage and also the lecture. So now let's move on to the Canadian Academic English Language Assessment. So as you can see here, there are 5 different sections within this test. For the speaking section, there will be 2 speaking tasks, each based on short questions. So basically it's an independent task, but after that, test takers will be given 1 speaking task based on a graph, diagram, or chart. So this shows that they will, the test will be assessing test takers' integrative skills by having them speak based on visual representations or sources. And then for the integrated reading section, the test takers will first have some reading passages with comprehension questions, and then at the end they will have 1 speaking question where they have to answer some question after reading a long passage. And kind of similar to the second section that I just mentioned, in the integrated listening section, test takers will be given short and long listening passages, and then they will have to produce an oral response based on a long listening passage. And then for Academic Unit A and Academic Unit B, students will be both given a reading passage with comprehension questions, a listening passage on the same topic with comprehension questions, and then they would have to write a response using the reading passage and the listening passage. And the difference between A and B is that for A, students have to write a longer response, and for B, they have to write a shorter response. Moving on to the Diagnostic English Language Needs Assessment in New Zealand. So this test has a writing section where students are assessed in their integrated skills. For example, I got a sample from the website. They are given a task and a prompt. So the prompt is asking them to describe the changes in people's choice of places of entertainment over that time, and either explain why the changes may have come about or compare the situation with that in the city or town that the test taker has come from. So using the graph that's provided, test takers have to respond to this prompt. Another kind of task type in this test is the argument task type. So there will be a topic provided. For example, do the present-day Olympic Games live up to the Olympic ideals of friendship, fair play, glory, honor, and peace as represented by the 5 Olympic rings? And students will have to incorporate the reading text materials that are given below. So if you see the boxes, they are excerpts from news articles or websites, and students will have to kind of integrate these input into their own written outcome. So moving on to the current research, according to Cumming's 2013 review, the widely acknowledged benefits of integrated writing assessments for academic purposes specifically are, first of all, they provide realistic, challenging literacy activities. Second, they engage test takers in writing that is responsible to specific ideas and content. Third, they counter test method or practice effects that I mentioned earlier associated with conventional tests. And then fourth, they evaluate language abilities in accordance with construction integration of multiliteracies, models of literacy. And lastly, they offer diagnostic value for instruction of self-assessment. Cumming also discusses 4 approaches to research on integrated writing assessments for academic purposes. And the first approach is to document and analyze the processes or strategies that examinees use during integrated skills assessment tasks. And then the second approach is to analyze the discourse features of written or spoken texts produced under conditions that involve summarizing or interpreting source reading or listening materials. And then the third approach is to investigate instructors or raters' perceptions of integrated skills assessment tasks by using, for example, interviews. And then lastly, the fourth approach is to examine the diagnostic values of integrated skills assessment, either for purposes of helping the instructors to identify their students' needs or improvements, areas of improvements, or for purposes of learners' own self-assessments and self-guided learning. However, we do have some challenges when it comes to integrated assessment. First of all, they confound the measurement of writing or speaking abilities with the measurement of abilities to comprehend source materials. So because comprehension of the input and production is very linked to each other in these kinds of tests, it's hard to kind of make them separate them apart because they're mixed together. And then second, they require a threshold of a language proficiency for examinees to perform on them competently. And this means that test takers will have to attain a certain level of proficiency in order to do the actual production. They will have to have certain vocabulary knowledge and grammar knowledge to comprehend the text first before producing. Third, interpreting the results can be tricky for diagnostic purposes. So this means that it's hard to know from the results on this test what the test takers needs or should be taught in the future. And then fourth, there are no fixed or even conventional genres for tasks such as summarization, précis, synthesis, or responses on academic type exams, so they are difficult to score. And this means that the written or spoken texts are so varied in form and genre and they depend on the intended audience, context, and purpose. There is no clear genre that needs to be assessed here, and it's very difficult to score. And lastly, they elicit texts in which the language from source materials is hard to distinguish from the examinee's own language production. So in other words, it's difficult to differentiate if the text, it's difficult to tell if the text is plagiarized or not, or if the test taker is appropriately citing the materials or not, because they are kind of lumped together. So lastly, I will talk about the future directions. So first of all, we need to refine the constructs and purposes that define language tests for academic and professional purposes. And Cumming mentions that considerable work needs to be done to understand and define the constructs essential to performing integrated writing or speaking tasks for academic or professional purposes. Second, many other assessment contexts and purposes need to be developed and analyzed further to determine if the benefits and challenges that were mentioned in this chapter obtain as they do in tests of English for university admission. So to date, there has been a lot of research on English for academic purposes with populations of international or migrant students, but we need to kind of expand that to different contexts and different purposes. Third, at the practical level for us as teachers, we need to really clearly specify the purpose, context, audience, and evaluation criteria of tasks that involve integrated skills. So when we create these tests of integrated skills, we need to think about to whom, where, how, and why exactly is the test taker expected to write or speak in this test. And then lastly, we need to establish if and how integrated skills assessment really do produce a positive impact on teaching and learning. So some questions that can be answered are, how can integrated language tasks promote effective teaching, learning, and instructional materials? How can these processes be most productively acted upon in educational practices in the society? So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I really look forward to the discussion for this week.